everyone, in Unit 3 we're going to be discussing decimals. The very first thing you're going to need to know with decimals is, again, just like with whole numbers, you're going to need to know place value. Numbers to the left of the decimal represent your whole numbers. Numbers to the right represent your decimal values. So notice the first place after the decimal is going to be your tenths place. So it goes tenths, hundredths, thousandths, and then 10,000ths. Just like with rounding whole numbers, we do need to know how to round decimals. So the first example is asking you to round this decimal to the nearest whole number. The first number to the left of the decimal represents your nearest whole number. So in this case, we are rounding the 6. The number directly behind the 6 is a number that is larger than 5. So we know that the 6 is going to bump up to a 7. And then after the decimal is going to change to zeros. Now, 877.00 is the same as 877. This one says round to the nearest thousandth. So remember, it goes tenths, hundredths, and then thousandths place. So we're rounding the 4. Behind the 4 is a number that's less than 5. So we're going to rewrite this as 3.004, and then everything behind it changes to zeros. Now, whenever you have numbers behind the decimal that after your number here is zeros, you can essentially drop these zeros off and rewrite this as 3.004. Now, this one's dealing with money. It's asking you to round to the nearest cent. So think about with money how many place values that we have. We would read this as $2.30 what cent. So when it asks you to round to the nearest cent, we're actually rounding to the hundredths place here. The number behind this 4 is a 5, so we're going to bump this up and make this $2.35. Again, I could write a 0 here, but it's really not needed when you have a decimal value. Pause the video and try some on your own, and then hit play to check your answer. This first one here asks you to round to the nearest hundredths. So tenths, hundredths is the second number behind the decimal. Behind that 8 is a 1. So we're going to keep this an 8. And again, you could put a 0 here if you wanted, or you can just leave it off. It's up to you. This one says round to the nearest tenth. So the tenths place is the first number after the decimal. Behind that 1 is a 2. Since this number here is less than 5, I'm going to keep this a 1. And then I could change all these to zeros, or I could just round it to 9.1. This one asks you to round to the nearest dollar. That is the same as asking you to round to the nearest whole number. So we want to know 30 what dollars? Is it $34 or does it bump up to $35? It all depends on that number behind it, which in this case is an 8. So this is going to bump up to $35. I could put 0.00 to make this 0 cent, or I could just leave it as $35. Now let's talk about how to go from decimals to fractions. Really, it depends on what place value your decimal goes to. So in this case, 8 tenths means I'll rewrite this as a fraction of 8 over 10. 4 and 2 tenths. Now anytime you have a number that's in front of the decimal, this represents your whole number. 0.2 means 2 tenths, which is 2 over 10. Again, in this example, 5 is your whole number. This goes to the hundredths place, so this is 12 over 100. Now, a cool way that you can use to memorize what your denominator is going to be, if you have 2 numbers behind the decimal, that means there's going to be 2 zeros in your denominator. If you have 1 number behind the decimal, notice there's 1 0 in your denominator. So those two will always match up. So let's look at some examples. This one here is 0.04. So there's no whole number, but there's 1 number behind my decimal. So I know that there's going to be 1 0, making this 4 tenths. I do want to simplify this down, and that's going to be simplified to 2/5. Now, this number has 3 numbers behind my decimal, so I know it's going to be 238. So to have 3 zeros means my denominator is going to be 1,000. Now, if I'm simplifying 238 over 1,000 as a simplified fraction, this is going to be 119 over 500. So I could divide both of those by 2. And finally, this one here, I've got 0.87. There's 2 numbers behind the decimal. And so I know that I'm going to have 2 zeros in my denominator. Now, 87 over 100, both of those are not divisible by anything, so this is my simplified fraction. Now, if you're going the opposite direction, so if you're going from a fraction to a decimal, you divide the numerator by the denominator in that order. So this is very important. When you're putting this in your calculator, you are typing in 2 divided by 9 in that order. So when you type in 2 divided by 9, you get 0.22 repeating. Now notice it says round to the hundredths place. So if this is your decimal, it's going to go on forever here. And I'm asked to round to the hundredths place. Look at the number behind it. It's a 2 behind it, so I know this is just going to round to 0.22. Same thing here, when I put this in my calculator, it's going to be 1 divided by 3, which is going to be 0.3 repeating forever. It's the hundredths place, so again, there's a 3 behind it, so I'm just going to round this to 0.33. Now, again, if you have a whole number in front, there's no point in putting that whole number in your calculator. A whole number is always the number that's in front of the decimal. What we do need to do is 3 divided by 5, though, to change this portion to a decimal. When you do 3 divided by 5, you get 0.6. So this is the same thing as 2.6. Now, there is no hundredths place, so there is no rounding involved here. 2.6 would be your final answer. I want you to pause the video and try these two concepts on your own, and when you're ready, hit play to check your answer. Now this one's asking you to go from a decimal to a fraction. So I'm going to say this is 64. There's 2 numbers behind the decimal, so I need 2 zeros in my denominator. If I simplify that fraction, which hopefully we got down pat based upon our last video, this is going to be 16 over 25. If you have a whole number, that whole number is going to stay out front as part of my mixed number here. 0.29, there's 2 numbers behind the decimal, so there's going to be 2 zeros in my denominator. 29 over 100 does not simplify, so 8 and 29 over 100 is going to be my fraction. Converting fractions to a decimal, keep in mind if it's a mixed number, that number is going to go out front. My whole number is going to be out front of my decimal. If I do 1 divided by 7 in my calculator, I do get 0.14285. I don't really need to go any further because it asked me to round to the hundredths place. So my hundredths place is the 4. There's a 2 behind it, which means that 4 is going to stay the same. So my final answer here would be 4.14. 5, 6, if I do 5 divided by 6 in my calculator, I'm going to get 0.8333 going on forever. Now my hundredths place would be this 3 here. There's a 3 behind it, which means that 3 is going to stay the same. So 0.83 would be my rounded decimal. Now the last concept I want to talk to you about is ordering decimals and comparing decimals. So when you're trying to order decimals from greatest to least or least to greatest, my suggestion is to write those numbers vertically. It'll help you in comparing your place values because you always start by comparing place values in the tenths place, and then you move on to the hundredths and then the thousandths place. So if you look at these decimals here, writing them vertically, if I'm trying to determine which one is my greatest number, notice in my tenths place here, this one has a 4 and these two have zeros. Automatically, this one comes in first place. It is my largest number. Then I go to compare my hundredths place with my last 2 remaining decimals. This one has a 9 and this one has a 0, so this one would come in second place. And then this one here has a 6 in my thousandths place, so this one would be in third. Now with comparing decimals, you're using your less than or greater than symbol. Again, I would write your decimals vertically. It just makes things easier. They both have a 9 in the whole numbers place, but they have a 2 in the tenths place here and a 7 in the tenths place here. So automatically, this one is the greater number. Notice I didn't even look behind it. All it matters is what's in the tenths place. If this has a 7 and this has a 2, automatically this is my greater number. Now, when you're using your symbols here, this is your less than symbol, this is your equal than symbol, this is your greater than symbol. You've probably heard the saying that alligator eats the bigger number. So when I have 9.25 and I have 9.7 and I establish that this is the greater number, my symbol, I know this is silly, but it works. The alligator eats the bigger number. So whatever is bigger, that's going to be the open side of your symbol. So you don't really have to memorize which one is less than or greater than. As long as you remember that it eats the larger number, then you've got it right. I want you to pause the video. I want you to first try ordering these decimals from greatest to least, and then I want you to use the less than, greater than, or equals to symbol to compare the numbers. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to write these numbers stacked vertically. I'm going to keep everything nice, neat, and in order. I'm going to make sure that my decimal lines up. This one's 9.4. I want to make sure I don't miss anything. 9.31. And then I've got 9.031. One thing you do want to do is fill in any holes with zeros. So here's a 0 here, a 0 here and here, a 0 there, and this one already has 3. Notice now they all have 3 numbers behind the decimal, which just makes your comparison a little bit easier. Now keep in mind this is greatest to least. So I'm going to scan, they all have a 9 to begin with, so there's a tie there. I'm going to scan down the row in my tens place. Now notice these two numbers here both have a 4 in the tens place. So automatically there's a tie there for greatest. So next I'm going to move over to the hundreds place. This one has a 3 and this one has a 0. So automatically I know this guy comes in first place and this guy comes in second place. So I've got 9.430 and then I've got 9.400. Now keep in mind if you're trying to choose here, 9.400 is the same as this guy here. So just keep that in mind when you're looking through your choices. Now to determine third place, scan your tens place. Look at what you got going on. We've already established these two. These are done. You've got a 3 here and you got a 3 here. All right, well, it's down to these two. Now I've got a 4 and a 1. So I know the one with the 4 is going to come in third place. The one with the 1 is going to come in fourth place. So I've got 9.340 and then I've got 9.310. Now, scan your tens place again. Both the first and the last have a 0. Oh, they come into a tie with the hundreds place as well, 3 and 3. Now look at your last decimal. This one has, or last decimal place. This one has a 4 and this one has a 1. So you get to come in fifth and you get to come in sixth. So 9.034 and 9.031. Again, if you treat it like a race, to me it makes things a little more fun and then it makes things a little easier. Now here, if I do write these vertically, this is going to be 78.43 and this is going to be 78.4. And remember, you can put a 0 here. So they tie for the whole number. They both have a 4 here, but this one has a 3 and this one has a 0. So automatically this one is the bigger number. So once I establish which one is the bigger number, I always say alligator eats the bigger number. So alligator is eating this guy. So 78.43 is greater than 78.4. Now this one I've got 7.123, I've got 7.213. They tie in the whole number, but the tens place, this one has a 2 and this one has a 1. I don't even need to look any further. The 2 automatically wins. So remember, alligator eats the bigger number. I know he's going to eat this guy here. So 7.123 is less than 7.213. Now with this one, 2.9 and 2.90, remember you can put zeros all behind decimals. It will not change the value. So these are actually the exact same number. So these two are going to be equal to each other. As always, if you have any questions, I'm just an email away.